Well, welcome everybody. I hope you're having a fantastic day, and I'm so glad you chose to spend a little bit of your time here with us today, and you won't regret it. Today, we're going to be talking with Dr. Kim Nugent about From Prison to Possibilities, negotiating redemption, reinvention, and radical self-worth. So, welcome, Kim. I'm really looking forward to this conversation today.
Thank you so much. I'm excited about it.
Yes, and for those of you who may not know her, our guest, as I say, is Dr. Kim Nugent. She's a best-selling author, an innovation leadership coach, and a passionate mentor. And her new book is From Prison to Possibilities, and she offers a really powerful collection of insights drawn from those who've overcome significant adversity, including and in particular incarceration, and being able to emerge to create more purposeful lives. So, whether mentoring rising professionals or guiding organizational leaders or helping individuals break their limiting patterns, Kim really empowers people to negotiate better lives. So you can see why I wanted to have her here. In particular, she focuses on negotiating from the inside out, which is totally in line with our philosophy here at the Art of Feminine Negotiation. So in this episode, we're going to explore how to maybe rewrite some of the narratives we've been telling ourselves, foster accountability, and be able to lead with empathy. So let's jump in and talk about your newest book, From Prison to Possibilities. I think it really showcases some powerful stories of transformation. And I wondered what drew you to highlight the journeys of incarcerated individuals, and how did you see those stories as sort of representative for all of us?
So, the first thing I would say is that before I wrote this particular book, I am really known as a mentorship expert.
Yeah.
So it was sort of a natural transition. I had already worked with, people within corporations who were seemingly invisible or couldn't get that promotion that they were seeking. They definitely had some blind spots. I've worked with college students to figure out, I mean, where am I going after high school and how do I navigate that through mentorship? And so ultimately, received a call from someone who had written a book and he asked if I had ever seen any books on mentorship in prisons. I hadn't. He was doing volunteer work in prisons and was seeing what a transformation was happening with them, and he thought it would definitely be transferable. So I said yes, and then began a very extensive research journey in terms of what would that really look like. But at the end of the day, Cindy, we're talking about human beings, and
Yeah.
we're all the same,
Yeah.
honestly.
Absolutely. And in your view, what are some of the key, internal I think people hear negotiations, they always think of, the boardroom. And for me, it starts with our negotiating our own mindset. So what do you think are some of those key internal negotiations that we have to make to shift from feeling stuck to stepping into new opportunities or possibilities?
Well, you said the key word, which is mindset.
Yeah.
And I know that you've had a number of guests that have really talked about the same thing, but I feel like if you're not open to the possibility of something,
Yeah.
uh, certainly between Carol Dweck's work as far as fixed and
Yes.
growth mindset, Marilee Adams in terms of judge or learner, assumptions and mindset, or Mary Morrissey's work in terms of constrictive or expansive thinking, it's all very similar with regards to where am I?
Yeah.
Number one. And I think sometimes for all of us, we get to a place or a moment, whether it's career, relationships, freedom, money, whatever that happens to be, where we seem to be stuck.
Yeah.
And where someone can really help you is either a coach or a mentor or a best friend, someone else to kind of help you kind of get unstuck, if you will, start to uncover those blind spots. And you can't get there by yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. And you have to be open. I love that you said that. And it's so ironic that you probably saw me smile when you mentioned Carol Dweck's work, because I would have bet the bank that I was a growth mindset because I'm adventurous, always trying new things and really pushing the boundaries and out there. But the more I deeply I read her book, I realized no, because it's that fear of failure. And when we're doing that, actually stops us from being in a true growth set. If we're stopping ourselves from taking chances and being open to new things where we might fail spectacularly and be willing to learn and grow from them, then we're not. So I love that you made a mention of that, and I wanted to put a pin in it. And you also talk a lot about accountability and, obviously mentorship and mindset we've talked about just briefly, and we'll dig in some more. But that accountability piece as well as a lever for change. So how can we negotiate our way into these tools, especially if we feel isolated or maybe unsupported?
Well, one of the things that's designed of this particular program is, it is through a structure. Let's start there. And so in my world, there's a built-in accountability just by the fact that we have structure, but there is something going before that. So first of all, the people that I get to work with, and I really think it's a privilege to be able to work in prisons and do this kind of work, is that when I'm going into a prison for the very first time, I'm working very closely with the warden or the programming warden or the assistant warden, and I'm asking them to, obviously communicate there's a new program coming, and we definitely want people who want to sign up who are open to the possibility of doing something new and different. They may not know what they're signing up for.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I want to go back to even before that happens, so they sign up and I'm trusting that they have chosen the right people to start out with to make sure that this program, at least from the initial phases, is very successful. Having said that, I assume nothing. And
Yeah.
what I mean by that is just because they have been selected or voluntold
Yeah.
and they're going to be with me for a few days, because I'm actually doing a train the trainer program, if you will, to be how do I become a mentor and what are the expectations and those things. When I finish at the end, I say this on day one, but when I finish working with them, I say on day one, I am really glad you're here with me. I'm really glad that you're part of the program, and I'm assuming nothing. And what I want you to think about over our time together is if this is something you truly want to do. So I come back at the very end of the program and say, okay, I want you to make a decision. If it's yes, great. Look forward to this journey with you. If it's no, thank you for being with me through the training. I just cannot afford you to be a maybe,
Yeah.
because a maybe is a weasel word
Yeah.
to be able to not commit to anything. And so when you
Yeah.
say accountability, that's the first accountability piece,
Yeah.
because the guys that small group mentorship, and so they're going to be relying on their mentor to make sure they are there for the meetings, that they're prepared, that they're ready to go, that they challenge their thinking, that they start to uncover the blind spots, they develop trust. Everything they talk about in that small group is really confidential. The other thing that happens naturally is, and this is where, yes, I wrote the book, and yes, I create the structure, but let me tell you, it's their program. And I want it to be that way. And each one brings a different flavor, if you will, or something that they like to highlight, but
Yeah.
pretty much has been consistent is the men before I leave create a set of bylaws that they want their mentees to, as well as themselves, to abide by,
Nice.
so that we have a standardization about the behaviors that we would accept being part of the program or not accept.
Yeah.
So if they can't live up to those expectations, there is accountability, because you won't
Yeah.
be able to be in the program. But I always like to say, this is a dress rehearsal for real life.
Yeah.
When they are released one day,
Yeah.
that they will be able to practice these same skills and behaviors, because we want to work with people who have a great attitude. We want to work with people who have the behaviors that we hold dear and near to our hearts. We want to have people who communicate well with us, and so that's no different than whether you're in prison or out of prison, it's the same thing.
Yeah, I love it. And I want to talk about sort of reframing as a road to transformation, because I know in your book you spotlight individuals, and reframing their stories was pretty essential to their transformation. So how can our listeners here today as well apply similar reframing? And if you could explain what we mean when we're talking about reframing techniques, and how can they maybe apply it in their personal or professional lives?
So I guess, let's go back to something you said a couple of questions ago about Carol Dweck, and once you really read deeply for yourself about, you thought you were a growth mindset. I bet if we ask all of ourselves, are we growth or fixed? We'd probably say growth, right?
Yeah.
But until you really start to take a look and do a lot of self-reflection, maybe not. I'll give you a perfect example about myself. So I promise you, until 2017, I thought the same thing, just as you were thinking. And then I started to take a look at, where do I say no?
Yeah.
And I was absolutely never going to write a book.
That's funny.
So talk about fixed. I
Yeah.
mean, if you can imagine the most fixed person in the whole
Yeah.
world, that would have been me. And
Yeah.
here, what I find so amusing about the whole thing is that you said so many great things about for yourself. I don't know that I even realized it was a fear of failure or
Yeah.
success, either one. It was just so clear I wasn't going to do it. There was no room for
Yeah. Never
anything
say
else.
never.
So, in terms of reframing, that might be a good place to
Yeah.
start
I
to
love
be
it.
able to say, where am I a no or where am I a yes? And if I'm a no, then what are some of the reasons that I feel that way? Nothing wrong. It doesn't mean you have to shift, but if I'm even open to something else, who could help me begin to look at that? So one of the things that I do, and I am a coach as well, so I use some coaching strategies throughout the curriculum.
Yeah.
And one of their assignments, and this is in week 3, so it's an A to Z curriculum.
Yeah.
So week 3 is A. A is for attitude, because I think attitude is
Yeah.
80% of it for sure.
Yeah, that's for sure.
And so they're reading an article and they're answering some questions and they're getting ready. That's a preparation each week for meeting with their mentor. And their mentor has similar but yet different questions.
Yeah.
But part of that assignment is to go out and interview 5 people about their attitude.
Yeah.
So one of the interesting things is I always say, it can be staff at the prison, it can be the chaplain, it could be some of your pod mates, it could be, but I said, if you're really courageous, if you have time to call home and ask your family about your attitude, you're going to get real
Shock.
talk. Now, I have to teach the next part, which is once they tell you whatever they're going to tell you, then the only response you have is 2 words. And I've learned this in coaching through Marshall Goldsmith is you say thank you. Feedback is a gift. You say thank you. They're going to be so shocked that you're not arguing that they won't even know what happened.
Yeah.
And then you're going to come back the next day and report on,
Yeah.
really the kind of feedback that you receive. But it's so great because you cannot uncover your blind spots by yourself.
Yes. Yes, that's so good. And I want to, on that reframing as well, and you gave great examples about it from that growth and fixed perspective, but even the stories we tell ourselves about being a victim, for example, right?
Mhm.
Or I'm not enough. I mean, there are so many stories we tell ourselves every day. And when you practice what Kim is talking about here, retraining yourself to reframe those stories after you've done the exercises she suggests, got your shock, so you're braced, and then start questioning yourself as well. I think that's fabulous. I love that call the family, and I love the warning, great big red print, we should talk. Now, and shame was something I wanted to make sure I touched on with you as well, because you write about how shame can keep people stuck. And I wonder, how can we learn to negotiate with that shame, for want of a better term, to move from self-judgment to self-compassion, maybe?
Mm. Well, the first thing I would say is I have to start with my own belief system when I'm walking into a prison or working with anyone, quite frankly. I have to suspend any judgment whatsoever. And I do believe, to my core, one of the values that I hold dear is that I believe in second chances. And I don't believe that a mistake should ever define who you are, whether that's in corporate America or whether that's in, life or wherever that happens to be. And unfortunately, that's not the way the world sees many people or situations. Having said that, we do some preliminary work in the book before we actually start into sort of the real curriculum, which is really all around self-reflection. And we take a look at character strengths. And one of those character strengths is really around forgiveness. Now, I don't call out to them. We don't discuss all
Yeah.
7, but I'll say which one of those had the biggest impact.
Yeah.
And for them, that begins to be the opening of some real change. It's just the beginning. We're not there yet,
Yeah.
but really having them think about, have I, for example, let's say it's a crime, and there are so many great organizations out there like Kairos Ministry or Bridges to Life or spiritual transformation programs that are inside prisons, and they are phenomenal. But I take a beginning kind of slice at that, which is in terms of the area of forgiveness. I will ask them the question, do you believe, if they believe in spirit?
Yeah.
Let's define spirit however they want to,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I certainly do not define that, but whatever that is, do you believe that spirit has forgiven you? And all the hands always go up, right?
Yeah.
Great, awesome. Let's test that theory.
Yeah.
So, have you forgiven yourself?
Yeah.
That's a very different mind shift right there. And so, one, if the answer is yes, great, because you've done some heavy work, deep
Yeah.
work. If it's no, then how could you believe the first statement?
Yeah.
Those two statements cannot
Yeah.
coexist together.
Nice.
So, one of the things that I think is really important is starting kind of there to really get real. But what I have seen in terms of transformation, when we talk about reframing and what's possible, I certainly know from coaching you can't change a behavior in less than 6 months. It's not possible. That's why this program lasts 6 to 9 months,
Yeah.
depending on what's happening. But over time, as we're working through some of these topics, several things start to shift. And one of the biggest things I've seen lately is that, because they're saying it out loud back to me, is wow, I really used to think about me.
Yeah.
And now I'm thinking about my family. And now I'm thinking about the consequences of the impact of my crime.
Yeah.
And what it wasn't just me, it's my family, friends, it's the victim, if there is a victim,
Yeah.
and their family and friends. And that lives on. And when they get the full impact of that, that's really when transformation can begin. But the other cool thing is that as they're working through the different topics week by week, generally they're calling home at some point, whatever that communication looks like. And it's starting to change those conversations at home. So instead of being frustrated, like, you know, all the things that are not going right in their life, right? Because you said something about victim.
Yeah.
They're getting out of that victim mentality and starting to take responsibility. And when the light bulbs go on to say, you know what, I don't want my son or daughter to follow in my
Yeah.
footsteps. And even if I'm behind bars, as a parent, I have an opportunity to make a difference week to week, and they're going to hear the change in me. And that's what's so exciting to me.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And that's so forgiveness of self, it sounds like, is that all important sort of first step. And I'm wondering, what tools do you use from there then, or do you suggest, Kim, for negotiating that trust and forgiveness with other people in your life?
Mm-hmm. So, what happens is it's kind of hard for anybody to imagine being in a prison if you've never been in a prison, whether you're visiting or you were personally incarcerated or you had a family member, right? It's like very foreign.
Yeah.
So let me give you a good foreign example that happens throughout this process. So this is a mentor to four mentees happening week to week. The meetings happen every single week. They're meeting for an hour. Now, depending on that particular facility, those conversations continue throughout the week when they see each other and all that. But as far as formalized structure,
Yeah.
and probably around week 5, I would say, it depends, it's different with everybody, but something is starting to shift. And what's starting to shift is because we have rules around confidentiality, whatever they talk about in those small groups has got to be maintained. They all are beginning to trust each other.
Yeah.
And they're trusting each other for several reasons. Number one is that it's a shared experience. They may have different backgrounds, different races, different sentences, all of those things. But one thing they have is they are all incarcerated.
Yeah.
And then when that trust builds, then what happens over time is they start sharing things they have never shared out loud before. And for a man to be able to share feelings
Yeah.
openly with another man and to be able to trust that they will not be hurt in any way by doing that is amazing. And then when you start to have that experience, now all of a sudden things look very different than they did before.
Yeah. Yeah, that's beautiful. And especially in that environment, but I think that applies universally, right? Such important messaging. And speaking of messaging, I think one of very many powerful messages in your book is that it's never too late to change the trajectory of our lives, right? So what would you say to someone who's maybe listening or knows somebody out there to share who feels like they've just gone too far down the wrong path to turn it around? What advice would you have for them?
Well, I think it'd be great if they had somebody in their life that they trusted and who believed in them, right? There is no better feeling than have somebody who
Yeah,
believes in you, especially when you don't believe in yourself.
yeah,
I don't think there is such a thing that you've gone too far,
yeah,
that it's too late to change. Certainly, I have been working a really long time and there's still many things for me to learn still. And I'm
yeah,
always, excited about learning and things like that. I would hate to think that I had learned everything there is to
yeah.
learn, or like this is it. No, no, no,
Yeah.
no, no. I don't think that. But I did find out something really interesting in the research. I had attended a conference and there was a behavioral health specialist in there and she was talking about many things. And she said something that caught my ear. And so kind of goes back to right now, I'm currently working in maximum security prisons in Texas, Florida, and Mississippi. And
Wow,
I,
tough crowds.
yes, exactly. But what's really interesting is that she said something where I see things even more differently than I ever did before. And she said that she didn't talk about women in this particular example. She only talked about men, but she said that men's brains mature at the around the age of 35.
Hmm.
Let's just say that's true. I'm not and I found research to back what up she
Yeah,
said, but at the same time, whether we're arguing that point or not, it takes time for brains to mature. She did not talk about women's brains, so I want to be clear about that. I'm not
although we
saying
can
that.
assume it's sooner.
Yes, I believe that to be true, but that's my bias.
Yeah.
But let's think about that for a minute. Things are happening at a younger and younger age
Yeah.
today because information is out there,
Yes.
right? And the world has changed dramatically. So let's just take a young boy at 11
Yeah.
and think about all the things that he can encounter from the time he's 11 to when he's 35,
Yeah.
and the decisions that he will or will not make, the environment he is or isn't in, the people he hangs around with, huge opportunities for mistakes. But
Yeah.
I write on page 1 in my book, and so I want to be clear that by the grace of God, I am not in prison.
Yeah.
You know, but any person
Yeah.
could be. Not saying
That's
I did
true.
something to,
That's true.
but in a moment, I could be at the wrong place, wrong time, wrong people,
100%.
and I don't think that people think that way. A lot of times they think about, oh, let's not forget, let's just totally forget about people who are incarcerated. But at some point, they're probably going to move back into your community. And I would much rather have a neighbor be someone who really wanted to better themselves and took every program they could while they were in prison
Yeah.
so they could be the best version of themselves when they're back in the community.
Yeah. Beautiful. God, I love your perspective, Kim, I must say. And I know the concept of, we're talking about possibility, and the concept of possibility implies, hope, vision, action. How do you coach people to negotiate past their fear and into action when they're wanting to step into a new future?
Mhm. So one of the things I think as well as I do, the first thing is, when you're in a coaching relationships, that's not going to happen in the first meeting for sure. You're building trust in a relationship and trying to find out what's really important to someone and what they want to do. But when you get to that point, you really got to ask those challenging questions. And I always say, I'm going to challenge you right now.
Yeah.
I want you to think about what you've just said to me and how you can step into that. And still that fear is going to be there and they're not ready to say, yes, I am. So sometimes I have to come around and just say, well, what is it costing you?
Yeah.
Or what is it costing the organization?
Yeah.
And then what potentiality could be there if you took a different step?
Yeah.
And generally, when they can get outside of themselves to see what it's costing them, but ultimately what's costing the organization or their business or their department, that's a whole different light shed. And then they can start to say, you know what, I am willing to at least make that first step, have that first conversation.
Yeah. Nice. And sometimes that's all it takes, right? And again, for our listeners, I want you to take a moment to think about that. I mean, we all experience fear, right? So finding the way to make that first step and then another step, and then you start to reframe, and then things will start to build exponentially from that. And and we've talked about coaching and that mentorship, which
Mm-hmm.
again, it is so important and helpful to try and get people who are in your corner, right? But in one of the powerful themes in your book is the ripple effect of mentorship. So how can each of us negotiate our role as a mentor, even if we don't see ourselves as one? Because we've got all of these listeners out there, and I'd like to maybe plant a little seed for them to reach out to mentor. What do you have on
Well, I'm
that?
glad you said that. I think actually two ways. So people are listening from different perspectives, and they may think, quite frankly, I'm going to go a different direction first, and they may think, you know what? I've never had a mentor. I don't know, what would that really look like? And so first thing is if you don't have a mentor, please get one.
Yeah,
I don't care where you are in your career.
yeah,
Honestly, it is so incredibly helpful. And so I was thinking about today as I was preparing to, talk to you today. One of the things listening to some of your previous guests was the impact of women helping women. And I didn't realize until I really started to look at it today was that when I was 16, I had my first mentor for the next actually 16 years until she
wow,
was 32, and until I was 32 and she passed away,
yeah,
was a woman. That next, when I went into a different career at a completely different level, now an executive, I also sought out a woman to be my mentor. And I have now looked at my history, and the people who've been most helpful to me have been women. And I didn't really necessarily seek that out.
Yeah.
But now, to your point, now my life, I've been working such a long time that I have mentored a few people.
Yeah.
And so if they're there, in terms of experience in their career, definitely think about becoming a mentor to a young woman
Yeah.
in early on in a career, or maybe someone who's thinking about business, something like that is definitely the way to go. But I also think mentorship is changing a lot in today's world. So I don't even think it's anywhere. I think there's generational mentoring, there's
Yeah.
peer mentoring. I think that people who are a little bit older or more experienced in their careers can actually seek out a younger mentor
Yeah.
to be able to stay in touch, depending on what the business is, stay in touch with what is the younger generation looking for, because you may not be thinking the same way they're thinking. And that could be a blind spot for your business.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting to say, I think a lot of people assume when they hear art of feminine negotiation that, oh, it's just women. And I really wrestled with whether to even use the term, but I wanted to call it out because I think for so long, I mean, we all have masculine and feminine energy.
Right.
We sort of randomly assign certain traits as being considered either feminine or masculine. And if you're a woman, absolutely reach out and mentor another woman. And also for our listeners who may be males, look for a female mentor. For women, look to also mentor a male because I think otherwise that pattern keep repeating where men are taught from a very young way, in the same way that women are taught to play small, all of this conditioning that keeps us smaller, men are the opposite. You need to be larger, you need to have be the biggest voice in the room. And I think both men and women started to see traits like empathy and collaboration and curiosity and community as being a weakness because of how we've been taught to define success. So thanks for calling that out as well. I love that, and I really invite everybody to consider mentoring. And thank you for calling out and being mentored. I don't care what stage of life you're at. I mean, both Kim and I offer coaching, and we're out there speaking and doing the world. And I would never be so presumptuous as to not think I don't also continue to need some coaching to keep elevating ourselves and growing. So now, how can leaders foster when we talk about that sort of mentorship and collaborate to extrapolate that to leadership generally? How can leaders start fostering cultures that allow others to renegotiate their value, potential, and contributions? I mean, I feel like in many ways we've taken a step backwards
Mm.
on that. We seem to be moving forward to this more collaborative approach, and now everybody's back coming from a sort of a place of fear. So, what thoughts do you have on that?
Well, I want to go back to one thing you said, and then I'll answer that for sure. I
Okay.
do believe that the part about the coaching part in particular, the majority of my clients are men, and for exactly the reason you said, because we think differently and we need each other
Yeah,
100% to be able to get a different perspective.
yeah,
But in terms of leadership, I think you need to go back to, as a leader, to really think about what are your core values, whether those are organizational core values or whether they're your own personal values, and really start from there and lead from that perspective. So I think that that's really important. And one of the things that I think has really kind of taken us backwards is COVID. And
yeah,
I know that we blame everything on COVID, but on the other hand is that when I think about in particular the generation that was about to start college was going
yes,
during COVID. And so instead of going and having that campus
yeah,
experience, if you will, they were home in front of a computer. And now that I'm seeing them in the workforce, there were a lot of missings, if you
yeah,
will, that they didn't get to participate in. That's one thing. I think the other thing is that it's getting harder and harder for leaders to be able to bring connection to their employee base, particularly if it's a hybrid or remote
yes,
employee group.
yeah,
The skills that you had before COVID, you're going to have to get some training and development around those things to be able to, and you have to be really intentional about it. You cannot just hope it's going to work out. It's not going to work out that way. And I think something as simple as building trust, which is the foundation to everything,
yeah,
but building trust, what does that look like in a Teams or WebEx or Zoom meeting?
yeah,
What does it look like when we're off site and we're not together as a group? Or what is it when we come into the office for a couple of days, but it's a mixed team of people because we're all not there at the same time because there's not enough room or
Yeah.
whatever it happens to be? All of those things for sure. But I think there may be some leaders who may not love this next little idea, but something as simple as starting out with an icebreaker,
Yeah.
in the meetings and things like that can just for connection purposes and
Yes.
to learn something new and different. I also think that if you're working inside a corporation, many of the people that work for you, you didn't hire.
Yeah.
And so getting to know them is really critical because they may have skill sets that you are not aware of that could really help everybody.
Yeah.
So there's just huge opportunities out there.
Yeah. The COVID piece, again, people are not talking about as much now because it feels like it's sort of past, but I agree. I think we fundamentally lost connection and we need to start getting really intentional about building that up again. And it's no surprise, I think, that we're seeing again, and not to get political, but on the world stage, we're seeing a lot more of that lack of connection that's playing out in ways that are potentially incredibly destructive. So I love that you called that out. Kim, this has been a fabulous conversation. I really want to get you back again. There's so many other areas we could explore or touch on. And I know you've done a lot of work, even well beyond sort of people who are incarcerated. You've
Right.
mentored people across sectors, business, education, corrections, and beyond. And actually, just before I ask you, sir, I have a question I like to end with around mindset, but I'm just wondering, it struck me, what common negotiation struggles, if any, do you see people face, regardless of background, regardless across all of these various sectors that you do? Are there some common struggles that you see?
In a word, experience.
Oh.
So let me say what I mean by that. There are so many amazing people in this world, and I get to work with many of them on a regular basis. So, and they're subject matter experts in their own right. And I bet everybody listening to your podcast is absolutely subject matter expert in their own right.
Yeah.
That's great. And that's also a problem.
Yeah.
And it's a problem because when we believe that we know, when we go into a situation to solve a problem and we know how to do it, we stop listening. And when we stop listening, we don't take in the different perceptions of the team that's surrounding us.
Yeah.
And that is a shame because honestly, everyone has something to contribute.
Oh, amen to that. And I'm sorry, I'm laughing not because it's funny, because what you've said is so important. I'm laughing because 30 something years as a lawyer. Oh my God, probably one of the worst offending groups in that category. They walk into every conversation, if not believing themselves, believing they need to be seen as. And that then compounds with all of that conditioning that we believe the successful person in the room is the person who's talking the loudest and the longest. And we don't listen. We don't show up with curiosity and ironically, you get better outcomes in your negotiations, whether personally or professionally, when you show up with curiosity and empathy and truly seeking to understand other perspectives. So I am so glad I threw in that last question there because I love that answer. And I normally love to end by asking, what's one of the greatest, we've talked a lot about mindset. What's one of the greatest mindset shifts that you've had in your life? Doesn't have to be about anything we've talked about, just an aha moment for you.
Actually, I'm going through it right now, if you really want to know the
Okay,
truth.
nice.
And so I'm an avid reader, Audible person all of the time. And I'm reading a book by Mary Morrissey called Brave Thinking.
Yeah,
And I just think following her whole life and really kind of taking a look at where's my thinking constrictive and where can it expand? Where am I setting the limits?
yeah.
And and then what life look like when I didn't have those limits? So to me, it's an ongoing search to learn and develop myself and be
Yeah.
curious about everything out there.
Yeah. And thanks for that reminder for myself even, because I think sometimes as we age, we have a tendency to be less worried about that. So I really encourage our listeners to think deeply about what Kim said here, giving us a lot of nuggets. And we are always open and want and need to stay open to growth and more growth and different perspectives and intentionally seek out different perspectives in your life. I think it's so important. So where can people learn more about you, Kim? Where should we be sending them?
So either to my website, which is www.drdnugentspeaks.com or Amazon, all of my books are there, but I'm always happy to talk to anyone about any of these, bringing out the best in anyone out there is always my favorite topic to talk about.
I love that. And we'll make sure for our listeners to put that in the show notes. And also, we've been focusing on Kim's most recent book, but she's got a virtual library out there as well. So I encourage you to take a look. And again, thanks, Kim. I have found this conversation totally stimulating. It's got me thinking about ways I can grow, and I really appreciate you.
Thank you so much.
And for our listeners, if you were listening at all, you had to be getting a ton of value from this episode. It has been super engaging and applies just in every aspect of your life. So make sure to not only to subscribe to the podcast, but make sure to share this episode with other people in your life who can benefit from this messaging now more than ever, I think, frankly. So, and before we sign off here today, if this episode maybe lit a fire in you and you're ready to stop playing small and start negotiating bigger, as Kim suggested, look for a mentor, seek out Kim, feel free to, come and look at working with me, whether it's one-on-one or group or online programs, we've got you covered. So tap into that feminine power of yours, whether you're a man or a woman, frankly, and start getting more of what you want and deserve without apology. And if you're you want to check that out, go to artoffemininenegotiation.com. Make sure to grab a copy of my book of the same name if you have not done that yet. Art of Feminine Negotiation, How to Get What You Want from the Boardroom to the Bedroom. And that's a wrap for this episode. So now go renegotiate your life, the life that they told you to settle for. And remember that every moment is a negotiation. So choose presence, choose power, choose purpose. I like to think this isn't just a podcast, but a movement. You can be part of something bigger. Together, we can redefine power, one conversation and one negotiation at a time. So join the movement and lead the change. In your world, lead with heart, negotiating like the powerful force of nature you are, because feminine doesn't mean weak, it means unstoppable. Until next time, take care.